Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on managing test anxiety for middle school students. For those who do not know me, my name is Sanai Hamia Dahir, and I'm the school counselor and the learning support educator for students with learning difficulties at the middle school. So, today we're going to talk about testing anxiety, and then we're going to try our best to destroy it. So first of all, I'm gonna mention the concept of unfinished learning. I'm gonna also talk about task taking skill. I'm gonna talk about the stress curve, what is test anxiety, and the difference between anxiety disorder. And at the end, I'm gonna give you tips on how to help your children overcome test anxiety. So let's start by saying that for 2 years now, Lebanon has been facing a tsunami of crises. So, an economic and financial crisis, likely to rank as one of the most severe in the world, the Port of Beirut explosion, and of course, the COVID 19 pandemic that was responsible for school closures. So students faced multiple schedule changes. Their routine has changed, specifically when they moved from hybrid to online learning. Also, their social circle was also impacted, especially that many students have left the country. And during online learning, some students have even struggled with unstable internet connection or Zoom fatigue. So it is no surprise that these multiple crises have had a negative impact on students' academic performance, on their learning, their social skills, their cognitive skills, and of course their overall well-being. Also, in a recent study conducted by McKinsey and Co., they analyzed the cost of COVID-19 pandemic, and they used the term unfinished learning to capture the reality that students were not given the opportunity in the year 2020 to complete all the learning they would have completed in a typical academic year. So, for example, some students lost knowledge or skills they once had, and others missed key building blocks of knowledge that are necessary for success. So that's why this year, this academic year, students are trying to catch up on all the learning they have missed. And actually, they are trying to move past the pandemic and past all the multiple crises. Now, when I say learning, I don't just mean academic learning, of course, but I mean social learning, emotional learning, and of course, cognitive learning. That's why one of the major skill the students have missed out on is test taking skill. And test taking skills are cognitive skills that allow students to undertake any test taking situation. I'm gonna try to just lower this down a little bit. Okay, so test taking skills are cognitive skills that allow students to undertake any test taking situation in an appropriate manner and to know what to do before, during, and after the test. These skills help students to translate their knowledge from classroom learning to answering and responding to questions when taking tests, of course, and hence impact upon their academic achievement. So it's logical to say that the better their test taking skills are, the better their academic achievements are. Okay, but also most test taking skills are useful in a student's life because they may benefit from effective use of time, ability to set priorities, ability to work both fast and accurately, and of course, ability to transform their thoughts into written ideas. But because of school closures and online learning, this specific cognitive skill, so test taking skill, was not very well developed for middle school students. And actually, this was proven also in a study conducted by LAU and the Center for Lebanese Studies, CLS. where they studied the impact of COVID 19 and the lockdown on the quality of education in Lebanon. So, as we know, taking or submitting a test online is not at all similar to sitting in a classroom and taking what we call today paper pencil test. So, the experience of reading and testing on a screen is not the same as reading and testing on paper. Students using the computer version, for example, they will usually need less time to complete the test. And as we know, the factor of time is really important during exams. Also, during online testing, students can zoom in easily on graphs, maps, pictures. So, visually, it's easier for them to access and process information. Also, they can easily access their material or search for the definition of some keywords or complex sentences. And instead of, for example, raising their hands in class and waiting for the teacher to come and answer their questions. And this, by the way, will lead to less distraction, of course, right? Because students are less distracted by their peers when they don't ask questions in front of everyone. And this also will lower the competition between students because, as we all know, especially during tests, students are more likely to compare the quality of their performance with others. And this will create stress, pressure, distraction, and it's a waste of time. Now, what do I mean when I say compare the quality of the performance in test? So I mean that students will observe who reached the final exercise first, who submitted the test first, who is stressing out and is possibly crying, who is still doing the first exercise, who wrote a full page on an essay, and so on, so on, so on. So less distractions means also less pressure because students have the opportunity to do their test in the comfort of their own house. And because today's generation are more used to technology, so students of today's generation are used to technology, the concept of online exam was easily accessible to them. Now, the idea here is not to compare between distance learning and face to face learning, or to compare between online based tests and paper pencil tests. No. The idea is to understand that because of this sudden shift to online learning, test taking skill, so this cognitive skill, was not really mastered for middle schoolers in particular. So it's not only a cognitive skill, it's an academic skill. And this is why many students might be uncomfortable now with the idea of school paper based test. So, what can we conclude from what we said? That students are not used to manage their time during test, to work under pressure, to focus their attention on their test without being distracted, and also to rely only on their memory and knowledge, which means to work independently. And of course, all this will create stress. So students will be stressed before the test, so while studying and preparing for the test. They will also be stressed during the test, so while trying to solve it, and they might also stress out after the test. And this is happening a lot, and many, many, many parents are coming to us with the concern that their child has test anxiety. And actually, this is mainly the reason why we're doing this webinar, to try to differentiate between the stress or the normal test anxiety that students might be facing today due to what we said earlier, the unfinished learning, okay, and which can be fixed in an educational way, and between the clinical anxiety, which is a psychological disorder that might need to be addressed in a more scientific or in a more medical way. So, so this is the idea to try to differentiate between these two types of anxiety. Now, prior to an exam or to a test, most students experience some degree of anxiety. And this is the body's normal biological and psychological response to stress. However, for some students, anxiety can impact their ability to concentrate and to perform successfully on exams. To understand it more, there's an optimal level of anxiety, and one that makes students study hard and prepare for whatever it is they are stressed about. However, once this optimal level is surpassed, anxiety can be damaging and can negatively interfere with their cognitive abilities, physiological arousal, their behavior, and of course, emotional well being. It can also interfere with studying, a good night's sleep before the exam, performance during the test itself, all of which are essential to doing well academically. So, this will affect their overall academic performance. Now, to make it more visual, this is what we call a stress curve that shows us the level of performance based on the level of stress students experience. You can see here the green zone, for example, shows us that too little stress will lead to a low level of performance because students are not stressed enough, so they're not motivated to study and to prepare for the test. In the yellow zone, we have the normal stress level that everyone should experience during test because it's responsible for the peak performance. On the other hand, the orange zone, here we have test anxiety. So that most of today's students experience because of what we said, the unfinished learning, and this might lead to a drop in their performance. And at the end, the red zone, we have a very high level of stress that may cause anxiety disorder. And here we should investigate more to check if it's only during test or if it's affecting the student's lifestyle. So we have to try to differentiate between these three levels: the yellow, normal anxiety; the orange, test anxiety; and the red, clinical or psychological anxiety. Now, for the yellow zone, as we said, it's the optimal stress level that can predict a good performance during tests. So we know that tests provide important opportunities for students to practice healthy ways to manage stress and anxiety. So students should aim to be in this zone, in the yellow zone, because a little stress, we said, it's a good thing. It motivates students to study. The nervous energy during the test helps students to help the mind to actively recall what they know and work at a good pace so they can finish on time. And as the graph show, the goal isn't no stress, of course. The goal is optimal stress. For the orange zone, we have test anxiety. And here we're going to focus more about this zone. So it's too much stress. It is more than just being a little nervous before a test, of course. It can often be intense fear or worrying and can affect academic performance, as we said. Or let's say it's usually responsible for a little drop in the performance during test. So because of too much stress, students can lose their focus. They can make many mistakes, and at the end, they will feel tired, disengaged, and they will quit or give up. But what is test anxiety? So it's the number one learning challenge of students today. It's not a disorder; it's a learning challenge. And as we said, it's mostly related to the unfinished learning that happened during the past 2 years due to the multiple crises that have occurred in Lebanon. But we have to know that test anxiety is not anxiety disorder, though it is related to performance anxiety. And it's not a learning disorder, though many kids with learning disorders might have it. Uh, and of course, it consists of several symptoms occurring in a reaction to a testing situation. We have emotional symptoms, physical symptoms, and cognitive symptoms. So to talk more about the symptoms, for example, for the cognitive symptoms, we have um, uh, concentration might become difficult. We have negative thinking, so I'm going to fail this course, I'm going to fail this test. Also, students, they start to compare their performance with others. They have racing thoughts, and we have something that we call blanking out. So the student's mind goes blank, and familiar questions will become unrecognizable. And of course, we have an overthinking. However, for the emotional symptoms, we have many emotions, negative ones, of course: anger, fear, guilt, helpless, shame, and disappointment. And for the physical symptoms, we might have a racing heart, dizziness, dry mouth, tense muscles, and many more physical symptoms. Uh, but the key is that almost all these symptoms should be present in order to talk about test anxiety. Of course, we cannot talk about test anxiety if we have only two cognitive symptoms, or if we have few physical symptoms but no emotional symptoms. So all these symptoms should be present, and they should be present during almost every test and in every subject. So why this is really important? Because if the student shows symptoms of test anxiety during only a math test, this means that the student has something that we call subject specific anxiety. Okay, this is not test anxiety, it's subject specific anxiety. For example, students who are diagnosed with having dyscalculia, which is a learning disability resulting in difficulty learning or comprehending arithmetic, such as difficulty in understanding numbers, learning how to manipulate numbers, performing mathematical calculations, and learning facts in math, might be more prone, of course, to struggle from subject specific anxiety in math. On the other hand, students who are diagnosed, for example, with dyslexia, which is a learning disorder that involves difficulty reading due to problems identifying speech sounds and learning how they relate letters to words, might be prone to struggle from subject specific anxiety in languages. But what are the most common causes of test anxiety? We have number one, negative thoughts. So, focusing on the bad things that could happen also fuels test anxiety. For example, a student worrying about doing poorly might have thoughts like, what if I forget everything I know? Or what if the test is too hard? So, too many thoughts like these leave no mental space for thinking about the test questions, of course. And just like other types of anxiety, test anxiety can create a cycle. So the more a person focuses on the negative things that could happen, the stronger the feeling of anxiety becomes. And this makes the person or the students feel worse. And with a head full of distracting thoughts and fears, this can increase the chance that the student will do poorly on the test, of course. The second cause is high pressure. So, knowing that they need to achieve a certain score to pass a class or a course can cause pressure, which will, of course, create test anxiety. Number three, we have fear of failure. So, taking an important test can put a lot of pressure on students. They're pressured to do well on the test, but are also worried to fail the test. So, this might lead to test anxiety. And number four is a lack of preparation, and this is normal, right? So sometimes students feel like they are probably prepared and that they will do well, so they will put off studying for the exam until the last minute, and or they will not study at all. So either way, this could cause test anxiety on the day of the exam. And the last one is poor test history. So, not doing well on a past test can, of course, make students anxious during the next test they will need to take. But who is likely to have test anxiety? One, students who are perfectionists and achievers, and who will be dissatisfied with anything less than a perfect score, are of course more likely to have trouble with the test anxiety or with test anxiety. And students with these traits sometimes find it hard to accept mistakes they might make, or they might make, or to get anything less than a perfect score. Okay. In this way, even without meaning to, they might really pressure themselves. Two, students who aren't prepared for tests but who care about doing well are also likely to have test anxiety. So, if the student knows that he or she is not well prepared, he or she will, of course, be worried about doing poorly in tests. Number three is students who have poor study or test taking skills, of course. And number four is students who fear parental punishment or expectations. Now, the next question is test anxiety considered a disability? So, test anxiety, in and of itself, is not considered a learning disability under the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it does not entitle the student to special accommodations. Similarly, the next question is test anxiety considered an anxiety disorder? So, according to the DSM 5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is a diagnostic tool published by the APA or the American Psychiatric Association, so, test anxiety is not a disorder, and it is not included in the anxiety disorders, which include, for example, separation anxiety disorder, selective mutism, social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. All right. So, this is the list of anxiety disorders um, in the DSM 5. And as you can see, test anxiety is not one of them. So, to go back to the orange zone, test anxiety is alone is not a sufficient diagnosis to support requests for accommodations because, as we said, it is not a disability, and all students have testing anxiety at some level. Also, exposure is considered an active ingredient in the treatment for anxiety based disorders. So, in order for exposure to be effective, fear should be activated, and the child should learn how to decrease his level of fear. That's why we do not accommodate students who might have test anxiety. Okay, so and now we're going to talk about the red zone in the stress curve, which is the last zone. Um so, as I said earlier, in the red zone, we have a very high level of stress that may cause anxiety disorder. And here we should investigate more to check if it's only sorry, during tests or if it affects the student's lifestyle and daily activities. Of course, all teenagers have some anxiety. It's a normal part of growing up. And it's the, as we said, it's the body's natural reaction to stressors. However, it's important to understand the difference between normal anxiety and anxiety disorder. When we are under stress, the body releases the hormone adrenaline, which prepares it for danger. So, of course, you may hear this referred to as the fight or flight reaction. And that's what causes the physical symptoms, such as sweating, a pounding heart, rapid breathing. But for the anxiety to be a disorder, so these sensations should be intense. And also, if fears and worries are so severe, if they do not go away, if they begin to interrupt the student's life, block his or her ability to successfully perform at school, to study, to play, to enjoy relationships, to perform daily activities, then the student should seek assistance because an anxiety disorder might be present. But which anxiety disorder? We have a list of anxiety disorder. Which one? It's the generalized anxiety disorder. So, as I said earlier, in the DSM 5, we have many types of anxiety disorders. But among these disorders, the one that might also affect students' performance during tests and might be sometimes confused with test anxiety is the generalized anxiety disorder. It's a mental health or a psychological problem. And individuals or students with this type of anxiety, they have excessive worry and tension about everyday events, and the worry may be more intense than the situation calls for, and of course it's expressed on most days for at least 6 months, to the extent that there's difficulty in performing day-to-day tasks. Now, teens with this disorder often worry about many things, and not only on their school performance, such as, for example, their physical appearance, their future events, so what's going to happen to me if my parents die, past behaviors. So I still remember. Or I still feel sick when I remember how everyone started to laugh at me when I tripped in front of the whole class, for example. Social acceptance, what if my friends are only pretending to like me? Family matters. So, for example, now that my friends' parents are getting divorced, what if mine will get also a divorce? Their personal abilities, why can't I play basketball like everyone else? School performance. So I'm feeling kind of confused in math class. I'm sure that I will fail the upcoming test, for example. So these are the worries that teenagers with generalized anxiety disorder might think about other than their school performance. Now we have to pay attention that the symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder may seem like other health problems. That's why, if you suspect that your child might be having generalized anxiety, please check with his or her healthcare provider for a diagnosis. Because an evaluation must determine whether one's symptoms are within the normal range or whether they are clinically significant. So the student should be evaluated by an appropriate healthcare professional who can provide documentation that supports the assertion that the student have an anxiety disorder. Now, what if the student does not have anxiety disorder but is still performing very poorly during tests, which makes him or her angry, anxious, and confused? Then here we should try to see if the student has a learning disorder or ADHD. So, learning disorders or ADHD, especially when they are left untreated or unidentified, can impact the student's academic performance, their ability to organize, to problem solve, to self regulate, and all these can be confused as having test anxiety during tests. So it's important to note that learning disorders, ADHD, and anxiety are three separate conditions with distinct differences and some overlapping characteristics. For example, uh, for specific learning disorders, we have difficulties with reading, writing, and or math, reduced motivation, increased frustration. The efforts are not matching academic outcomes, and we have, of course, embarrassment and a lower self-esteem. Also ADHD. So we know it's a brain-based disorder which often impact effective executive functions, including working memory and emotional regulation. We have difficulty in planning and or organizing. The student is forgetful most of the time. They have a difficulty starting tasks on their own, focusing on one task for an extended period of time, and of course difficulty to listen and to follow instruction. So if you notice that your child is struggling to keep up with his or her peers academically, it's important to avoid assuming that he or she just isn't trying hard enough. So always encourage your child to keep trying, and don't react to their difficulties with criticism. Instead, you should look for signs that they are experiencing processing issues or any specific learning disorder. So the school, the administration, and our very high qualified teachers are constantly working on beating this unfinished learning and on decreasing students' stress anxiety. But what can you, as parents, do So how can you help your children beat this test anxiety? So I'm gonna try to give you a few tips. And here I'm gonna start with tips that students should do before the test. So we're gonna talk about time management, behavioral relaxation techniques, the need to have a good night's sleep, to maintain a healthy diet, the idea of a school setting environment at home, and having a growth mindset. So, for time management, you should teach your children some time management skills. So, teach them how to write to do lists, how to schedule their personal time, how to create flexible schedules, and most importantly, how to read time. So, it's always a good idea to ask students to always wear their watch while doing any time limited activity and to monitor the time, and then they should try to apply this skill during tests. So students should be able to monitor their time while doing tests. So teachers, always remind students not to be obsessed about running out of time during tests. They tell them to check the time periodically, but avoid checking too frequently, as this will only distract them and make them more anxious. They also tell them that it can be a better strategy to sacrifice few points by not quite finishing the test than to rush through the last several questions and thus miss many, many points. Now, one tip in time management skill is to start preparing early rather than waiting till the last minute. So never procrastinate. So waiting until the last minute to study means they won't retain nearly as much information as they will need, and won't do as well as they could. Another strategy in time management skill is creating a study plan. So, having a study plan is important for success on a test. Of course, it will allow children to create blocks of time to study each day. So, students should create a study plan from the day they start studying and follow through until the day before the test. So, as parents, you can always remind them of these several points. And here we have the curve of forgetting. It shows us that how students are less likely to forget information if they daily study for a few minutes only for the exam. Two, behavioral relaxation techniques. So, integrating these techniques into the pre test routine can help students relax before and even during the test. Deep breathing exercises, meditation, and even yoga are relaxation techniques to counteract feelings of anxiety and bring the mind and the body back into equilibrium. So, students can benefit from practicing these techniques on a regular basis beyond exam day. You don't really need to go to a therapist to learn basic relaxation techniques. You can simply Google it and use any type of relaxation technique and teach it to your children. It's even a greater idea to practice these techniques together, and the secret is in being consistent. For example, family yoga provides a wonderful place to spend healthy and happy quality time together. Now, for example, a very easy breathing and relaxation technique used to reduce anxiety is called 7 to 7 self talk. So, this exercise is really simple, that you may be skeptical about its effectiveness. However, many students have found that it really helps lower their anxiety level to a level, let's say, that is helpful rather than harmful. So, step one, close your eyes. Step two, they should breathe in slowly to the count of seven and then exhale to the count of seven. Step three, they should continue this slow breathing until they actually feel that their body is becoming to be relaxed. And usually it might take them 2 to 4 sequences, not more. And step four, they should open their eyes and give themselves a positive, a very specific self talk. So, for example, I studied hard, I will do the best I can. So, this very simple procedure should take only about a minute, and it's very well worth the time, especially during tests. Number three is rest or sufficient amount of sleep. So uh, another point is to make your child is make sure actually make sure that your child is getting enough sleep, which will help with focus and behavior. So that's why it's always advisable to turn off all screens at least an hour before bedtime. And according to the National Sleep Foundation, middle school students need 10 to 11 hours of sleep. And getting enough rest is important, not just for our overall health, but it can improve our ability to focus, to learn, and to retain information. So, our memory. That's why it's important to remind your children to get plenty of sleep the night before the exam. For maintain a healthy diet, of course, students can have trouble concentrating on an empty stomach, and it has been proven that a healthy diet can actually relieve stress. So they should eat fruits and vegetables. They should incorporate in their diet foods with high that are high in protein, and they should avoid processed food. Now, why teens are so stressed? Simply because if we look at how the day in the life of the teen should be, they should spend 8 hours at school, sleep for 9 hours, study or do their homework for 2 hours. They should engage in social media for 2 hours, physical activities for 2 hours, and eat for a total amount of 1 hour. But do they actually do this? No. Today, many teen days actually look like the next one. So they spend 8 hours at school. They sleep for 6 hours at most, not nine. They try to do their homework for 5 hours. They spend 4 hours on social media. They spend 3 hours doing physical activities, and they eat for less than an hour. So this is why they are mainly stressed. Number five is to provide a school setting environment at home. So to banish distraction. Of course, it comes without saying. The child should not study in the TV room, right? But also, you should try to lower the volume of the TV if you're watching TV while your child is studying. Not only TV, but also avoid making phone calls next to your child if they're studying, or try to keep siblings away from the child if he or she is studying. So, in other words, try to limit noisy distractions. Also, if the child is not studying or not doing his or her homework, avoid pressuring them by shouting and yelling. So instead, try to put or to set a time for studying. For example, it's 4 o'clock now, eat and dress, and start studying at 5. So the goal is to avoid linking pressure with the fact of studying. And of course, you can always contact the learning support teacher if you feel that your child has a problem staying on task or any other problem related to studying. Also, routines are very important, so try to always stick to the same routine, even during holidays or days off, because having a routine helps to bring consistency and comfort to a child's life, as well as providing a sense of normality. I know it's true that change is important in life, but it can also create a lot of added stress for children. So routine help to reduce the stress and brings with it a feeling of security. And at the end, embrace your child's learning style. So some kids, for example, they can't sit while studying, and they need to constantly move in order to process and retain information. And this is absolutely fine. This is actually what we call a kinesthetic learning style. So don't force the child to sit down or to study following the traditional way. And number six is having a growth mindset. So, stress and anxiety can often cause students to experience negative thoughts and self criticism. That's why promoting a growth mindset can help students to overcome these feelings. It's important that they understand that the test is a snapshot in time, and improvement can be made to improve performance in the future. That's why children should keep a positive attitude and should keep in mind that their self worth does not rely on the outcome of a test. Also, they should watch what they are thinking about. So, if Expecting to do well on a test can help them relax. What about if they expect they don't do well? Of course, they will not do well. They should watch out for any negative messages they might be sending themselves about the test, because these thoughts can contribute to their anxiety. So if they find themselves thinking negative thoughts, for example, I'm never good at taking tests, or it's going to be terrible if I do badly on the test, or many more negative thoughts. So you have to teach them how to replace these negative thoughts with positive messages. Of course, not unrealistic positive messages, but ones that are practical and true. For example, I've studied hard enough and I know the material, so I'm ready to do the best I can. And lastly, use flashcards. So flashcards are another great resource to prepare for a test. They allow students to study the material in smaller chunks rather than a long list of concepts. And students will be able to focus on one concept at a time. Now, let me give you tips that you can give to your students, to your children, that they can use during the test itself. So, accept that they won't know everything, invest their time wisely, read all the instruction, review, expect some anxiety, stay focused, and take a break. So accept that they won't know everything, because it's very difficult to know absolutely everything there is to know on a test, especially if it's a cumulative test. So sometimes they will see questions on the test or on the exam that they don't know the answer to it, and you should tell them that it's absolutely fine, because they should keep in mind that they have studied enough and that they should see more questions they will know how to answer than questions they don't. Two, they should know how to invest their time wisely. So, reviewing the test beforehand will allow them to figure out the best way to spend their time. They will want to focus, for example, on the exams sections with the most exam weight first. This will help them to ensure they score as many points toward their grade as they can. Also, if they find themselves stuck on a question, it's perfect. It's perfectly okay to put it on hold and come back to it later. That way, they don't miss out on points by investing too much time in one question, and the answer just may come to them in the meantime. And you can tell them that they can start with what they know. So this is something that teachers will tell them. It's always a good idea, also to remind them. So when they sit down for the test, they don't have to start with the first question. They should start with the ones that they know and skip the questions that they don't know, instead of wasting their time trying to figure them out. Three, read all of the questions or all the instructions. So, because failing to pay enough attention to instructions is how we make the majority of our testing errors. So, prior to answering any questions, students should go over all of the instructions at least one time. And that way, they will have the best possible idea of how to approach each question. Number four is review. Review. So this is something that teachers always ask students to do, especially students who tend to submit tests before the time is up. So once they have finished every question on the test, of course, they will have to review everything if they have any time left. And only here they can spot careless mistakes. Also, checking over the answers allow them to make sure they have filled everything in and haven't missed any important information or step. Also, they should expect some anxiety. So as we said earlier, some anxiety is normal and can be used to stimulate performance. So remind your children that it's okay to feel anxious before or even during the exam, but the secret is to try to control the anxiety. If they follow all the strategies that you mentioned before, then controlling their anxiety level will be a very easy task to do. Now, stay focused. They should stay focused. So, on the test day, remind your children to try to stay focused on the test only. So, they should not worry about how the other test takers are doing. and they should only concentrate on their own test. But if they feel that their test anxiety is getting to be a little too much, they should take a quick break for a few seconds only. So they can close their eyes, they can take 10 deep breaths, and then get back to concentrating on the exam. Or they can even try relaxation or breathing techniques. And now, let me give you a few tips on how you can help your children to overcome test anxiety after the test. So they shouldn't dwell on the what ifs. They should reflect on past successes. They should use returned test as a reference, and they should know that they are not their score, and of course accept mistakes. So uh, here we're talking about dealing with test anxiety after the exam. So what's done is done. They have studied hard and done their absolute best. And that's all that matters, no matter what grade they get. They can always use this exam as a learning tool for how to better prepare for the next one. Also help them to reflect on past successes. So while talking with your children, always reflect on past good grades. So reflecting on past achievements can help build confidence and serve as a reminder that success is not out of reach. So if the child was successful once on a test, he or she can be successful again. So try to help them to reflect on the behaviors and strategies that influenced their success on a previous test, can help them identify long-term strategies for future success. Sorry. Now, instead of telling them you didn't study hard enough and that's why you failed the test, you can try to tell them, so I remember when you got the 80 on the test, I think you got it because you slept well before the test and because you prepared very well for it ahead of time. I think you can do this again. Number three is use returned tests as a reference. So once they have their score and test paper back, they can use it to further prepare for other upcoming tests. So most students will usually just look at the grade instead of looking at errors and try to solve them once again. That's why they should check out where they didn't do as well and make a note to pay special attention to that subject or this question type for the next time that they have an exam to study for. Now, here it's really, really important. You have to tell them that you are more than a test score. You are not your score. So we have to keep on repeating this to our children because too often grades affect their self esteem. So we have to tell them that they have prepared as much as possible for the exam. And no matter what kind of score they get, they are still worthy as a student and a person. And one exam will not destroy their entire future, of course, and they should always and always try their best. And finally, accept mistakes. So another thing they can do is to learn to keep mistakes in perspective, especially if they are perfectionists, right? So everyone makes mistakes. And they may have even heard teachers refer to this as, or to mistakes as learning opportunities, because learning to tolerate small failures and mistakes is really, really a valuable skill. Now, at the end, the more tips and strategies you know, the better you can play an active role in preparing your children to overcome stress and manage their test related anxiety. So, thank you for your time, and I hope you benefit from this webinar. At the end, for parents who wish to contact the Learning Support Educator of the English section, you can reach out to Ms. Bahira Abbas on the extension 176 or by sending her an email. And for the parents who wish to contact the counselor of the English section, you can reach out to Ms. Maya Sana on her extension 476 or also by sending her an email. And for those who wish to contact the counselor or the learning support educator for the French section, I'm your to Google person, as we say. So my extension is 175, and this is my email address. So again, thank you for listening to this webinar, and remember that I'm only one email away or even one phone call away if you have any questions or concerns.